Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's information session on unpacking the housing charter reform. I am Lara Morita from the New York City Department of City Planning. I am joined by my colleague, John Mangan, who will be starting with a presentation, and then we'll dedicate the rest of the time to answering your questions. Next slide. Yep, I might have skipped a slide. We can come back to the thing. I just want to make sure everybody understands how they can submit their Q&A. So during the presentation, there at the bottom of your screen, there is a button where it says you can submit questions in the Q&A function. Please use that to submit questions during the presentation. You can also submit them after the presentation, but feel free to submit as you are reviewing the presentation with John. If you are using your phone, I will remind you at the end, but you can press *9 to raise your hand to ask a question live. And our team will read out your last 4 digits of your phone number to unmute yourself, which would be *6. I'll give these instructions again, and we'll go back and forth between live questions that are people asking and questions that we're receiving in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to begin our presentation this evening.
Thanks, Lara. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. I'm John Mangan, Head of Housing Division at City Planning, and I'll be providing an overview of the recently enacted charter reforms tonight and helping to answer any questions that you might have. These were not city planning proposals, but I'd say city planning is the agency with the biggest role in implementation, and we want to make sure that implementation rolls out smoothly for community boards, for other participants in the land review process, for applicants, and for members of the public. So just a quick overview on the 4 questions that we'll look at tonight, the 4 proposals. You may remember this from your ballot in November. Question 2, fast tracks for affordable housing. The next question, the Expedited Land Use Review Procedure, or ELRP. Next was the Affordable Housing Appeals Board for projects in creating affordable housing. And then finally tonight, modernization, centralization, and digitization of the city map. We'll, of course, go into all of these in more detail over the next few minutes. Next slide. So first, brief rewind on process. From January to July of last year, 2025, the Charter Revision Commission held 10 hearings, 2 in each borough, dozens of hours of live testimony, thousands of comments that focused on a few different issues, housing and land use foremost among them. The Charter Revision Commission distilled all that public input into, what they might call 3 different main themes. One is that New York City is not building enough housing, and especially affordable housing, to keep up with the needs of all the people who live here or want to live here. Next, they noted that housing production is extremely uneven. Last year, 10 or 11 community districts produced as much housing as the other 49 or so community districts combined. So just vast disparities in affordable housing and housing production generally. And then finally, publicly financed projects, typically affordable housing, and modest changes to land use regulations. Those types of applications and those types of projects face particular challenge. And so the commission saw it as its role to figure out how to address these issues identified by the public. Next slide. So I'd say first and foremost, the commission started with a recognition that New York City is blessed with ULURP that it has worked fantastic over the more than 50 years that it has been in place, that it provides, guaranteed access to a time-limited process that balances neighborhood perspectives with citywide needs. But, and they wanted to maintain, the commission in its report laid out a desire to maintain the existing ULURP pipeline while also identifying things that ULURP has not been good at, especially since 1989, the last major revision, where the commission noted that certain types of projects, whether it's modest increases in housing capacity through small rezonings, or spreading housing and affordable housing development equitably across the city, or expediting really increasingly crucial public projects around resiliency infrastructure, clean energy, and open space, that ULURP was not doing a particularly good job of that, and so that was a real focus. But they also wanted to make sure that anything that they were addressing preserved strong public review. They weren't taking anything that was subject to public review in the past and proposing to make it as of right. They were pretty adamant about not wanting to reduce community board review by even a day. And the proposals ultimately did not touch that, did not touch community board review. And also just noting that environmental review, historic districting and landmark protections, wage and labor protection, safety standards, those things exist outside of the charter, and they did not want to try to touch those things and did not propose to touch those things. So next slide. All right, let's get into the proposals themselves. I'd say, overwhelmingly, the thing that the commission heard the most around housing and land use was, we need a fast track for affordable housing. And so the commission saw as one of its main jobs to give content to this thing, that this, principle, this statement that they heard from members of the public over and over. The commission heard that there's not enough affordable housing, that that it's very inequitably spread across the city. In fact, in the final report, one of the more interesting charts compared the council districts with the highest affordable housing production with the council districts with the lowest. The highest average 700 units per year or so, whereas the lowest average fewer than 10. So vast disparities there. And they also wanted to address some of the process obstacles that publicly financed projects in particular face. So first off, BSA fast track zoning action for publicly financed affordable housing. What does that mean? Next slide. So I would say one of the most powerful moments of testimony during last year in the Charter Revision Commission hearings was from an affordable housing developer that came to city planning for a rezoning for a 100% affordable housing project. And they needed a rezoning. City planning said, okay, in order to have a rational map, we need to expand the rezoning area beyond your site to capture other sites on the surrounding blocks. That happened to capture a surface parking lot that would have had enormous development potential under the rezoning. That kicked them into a full environmental impact statement, an EIS, that added years to their timeline and roughly $1 million to the cost to get that application to the land use review process. So it got to the land use review process. It made it through the community board, through the borough president, through city planning commission. And then at the end of the process, the application was just cut back to the applicant controlled site anyway. And so what you had was years of delay, almost $1 million in additional expenses that turned out to be, for naught. It accomplished nothing. The commission wanted to find a way to facilitate, to expedite publicly financed affordable housing projects in the future, and that's where this action comes in. To be eligible for this BSA fast track, which can give site-specific approvals to publicly financed affordable housing project, the applicant has to be what's called a housing development fund company. And this is the vehicle under state law for virtually all publicly financed 100% affordable housing projects. So first you got to be that. Next, the project has to be in a district that allows residential. So if you want to put a housing project in a manufacturing district that prohibits residential today, that happens, but you would have to go through the typical land use review process, full ULURP. The project has to meet a neighborhood character finding. That is, it can't clash with existing neighborhood context. And then finally, it needs to be consistent with HPD design and development standards, which amounts to a soft commitment letter from HPD. So they need a thumbs up from the agency that will ultimately support the project, help to finance the affordable housing project. And if an application can check all those boxes, then instead of having to come to city planning for a full rezoning and all that entails, they can go to the Board of Standards and Appeals for a 60-day review at the community board and then a 30-day review at the Board of Standards and Appeals. Now, sometimes an applicant has to revise in response to the public review to such an extent that they can't get BSA approval in the first 30 days. In that somewhat atypical situation, they can get one 30-day extension in order to, they would hope get approvals instead of having to go back to the beginning of the process. And in that way, publicly financed affordable housing projects can come in for site-specific approvals. If for whatever reason the project doesn't move forward, the zoning on that site remains unchanged. The only thing that gets approved by BSA would be the 100% affordable housing project. And BSA is a publicly appointed body with 5 members, including architects, engineers, and planners. It builds on existing BSA actions, and findings like this are well within the competency of the agency, and have the potential to save time and money that can be plowed back into projects to deepen affordability or increase the number of affordable units. Okay, next slide. The next fast track for affordable housing that was recently enacted is the affordable housing fast track in the community districts that produce the least housing. Next slide, please. Under this action, every 5 years, Department of City Planning, along with HPD, will assess affordable housing production in each of the city's 59 community districts. Now, that's the rate. How many new affordable housing units have been created over the last 5 years over the total number of housing units in that community district at the beginning of the cycle. So it sort of adjusts for high density, low density, or whatever. It doesn't treat every community district the same. Now, based on that assessment, in the bottom 12 community districts in terms of affordable housing production, those will be subject to a fast track land use approval process for projects that include permanently affordable housing. The first assessment will be made in October of this year, 2026, and the first affordable housing fast track cycle will open on January 1st, 2027. So what types of projects are eligible for that fast track, and what is the fast track? First off, projects have to be MIH or better. If it has to be MIH or better, that guarantees that anything that gets built as a result of these actions will include permanently affordable housing at the affordability levels laid out in the MIH program. And this includes MIH rezonings. It can include other types of projects that definitely facilitate affordable housing as well. And it can include, bigger actions like neighborhood rezonings and other projects that have that full environmental impact statement. The Charter Revision Commission thought it was important to enable not only private applications, but public applications as well, so that, often the public could be in the driver's seat when it comes to planning, where increases in housing capacity is going. What's the process? So we can go to the next slide. Under this process, under the fast track, instead of having to go through full ULURP, 7 months, to do an MIH rezoning or similar action, projects can go to the community boards and the borough presidents for concurrent 60-day review, and then to the city planning commission for 30 days and a vote, and that's it. Now, I noted that EIS projects can take advantage of the Affordable Housing Fast Track. In that event, the commission would have 45 days to review so that they could get from draft EIS to final EIS reasonably within that period. And the idea here is to try to ensure that parts of the city that aren't seeing increases in housing capacity, that aren't producing housing or affordable housing, can get in the game. They can also help to participate in addressing what has become a dire housing shortage that drives many of the affordability issues that people in New York City face. Okay, next slide, please. Moving from the affordable housing fast tracks to expedited land use review procedure. We all know ULURP, Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. I've said that, there's a significant ULURP pipeline that works great, that is the envy of other jurisdictions, places like Chicago where things get pocket vetoed all the time, or things like San Francisco that don't have any as of right development at all. ULURP is great. The commission wanted to maintain that, but they also wanted to do something that could enable types of projects that have been vanishingly rare since 1989, since modern ULURP was instituted. So I know staff review for the Charter Revision Commission, for instance, found that there were a big fat zero rezonings for increases of 30% or less in medium and high density districts. That meant that when people were applying for land use changes, they were shooting for the moon. They were trying to double or triple housing capacity in order to recoup some of the costs that all the time and money and political risk entailed by ULURP just pile on top of projects. So, the Charter Revision Commission proposed and the voters enacted an expedited land use review procedure for classes of changes that are modest in nature or that are categorically beneficial and urgent. And I will get into those now. Next slide. Well, I guess first, ELURP, instead of the 7-month ULURP process, ELURP looks very similar to what I just showed you for Affordable Housing Fast Track. 60-day concurrent review at community boards and borough president, onto the City Planning Commission for 30 days and approval. Unlike the Affordable Housing Fast Track, EIS projects are categorically not eligible for ELURP. If you have potentially significant adverse impacts, then ULURP is probably where you need to go, where you should go to get more extensive public review around those issues. So EIS projects categorically excluded from ELURP. Next slide, please. First big category, ELURPs for housing proposals. Zoning map changes in lower density districts, R1 through R5. That's the blue in the map that you see on the slideshow. You can rezone to any district with a standard height of 45 feet or less, or an FAR of 2 or less. That means you can rezone from any low density district that allows residential to any other low density district that allows residential. As long as you're staying within the low density family of districts, you can do it. Low density maxes out basically under the qualifying residential sites proposals from City of Yes for Housing Opportunity that was enacted in late 2024. The biggest thing you can get there is a 5-story apartment building at 2 FAR, in a transit-oriented development site, large site near transit, or within a low-density district that allows commercial. But those are still relatively modest compared to what we're used to in many parts of the city. Next, in medium and high density parts of the city, that's the orange that you see on the map. Any rezoning up to a 30% increase in residential capacity can happen through ELURP. I think I mentioned already that there were 0 rezonings of 30% or less in medium and high density districts over the last 10 years out of hundreds of rezonings. That was a pretty good indication to the commission that ULURP did not work well for those types of rezoning, and it basically prohibited types of modest organic changes to land use regulations that we heard from many parts of the city would be desirable, would be preferable. Modest organic change as opposed to ULURPs that we've seen in the past, big jumps, big increases in density that can create anxiety among certain folks in neighborhoods. Next, HPD dispositions and acquisitions for affordable housing. When the city is selling to a private entity specifically for affordable housing projects, this would enable that to happen through that 90-day process instead of the full 7-month ULURP. That saves time and money that, again, can be plowed back into those projects to deepen affordability or create more affordable units. Um, Next, city map changes. We'll get into city map a little bit more in a couple minutes, but city map changes for affordable housing. That's mappings or demappings of streets or street mappings that meet state law street access requirements for housing. Those can happen through ELERP as well. As it is today, certain affordable housing projects, you can add years and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to those projects if you have to map or demap streets in order to make them happen. Also, in some lower density parts of the city, the requirement to map streets to meet state law access requirements can just be a deal breaker there. It can make projects infeasible and leave land totally vacant and fallow, even when it would be a great place for relatively low density housing in New York City. Next, sail away dispositions by the city. SAIL stands for slivers, access ways, and interior lots. These are small parcels generally that are not independently developable. The city likes to dispose these to adjacent property owners to get them back on the tax rolls. It did not really make sense to require full ULURP in order to do that. And so now they are eligible for ELURP. Next slide, please. The other big category of projects subject to ELURP relates to resiliency, clean energy, and open space. I think of these as categorically beneficial projects that sometimes didn't happen under the previous regime just because it would take too long, it would cost too much. So the city can acquire voluntarily, flood buyouts for 1 to 4 family homes in defined flood-affected geographies. If you can believe it, prior to the election, if the city wanted to acquire a single family home from an owner who was looking to get out of harm's way, uh, that single family owner would still have to go through full ULURP, presenting a really tremendous obstacle for buildings of that nature. So this enables voluntary flood buyouts for smaller residential properties subject to ELURP. Get owners out of harm's way faster. Again, that's only for voluntary acquisitions. Next, acquisitions adjacent to city-owned property that are wetlands or otherwise not developable, undeveloped land in mapped but unbuilt streets or underwater or land with no owner of record. This happens a lot in coastal areas for resiliency project. In fact, one of the very first ELERPs we have is acquisitions of wetlands for a resiliency project. Don't have to go through full ULERP anymore. It can happen through this expedited process. Next, dispositions for solar power leases on public land. Can't sell city-owned property through this process, but you can lease it. What we heard is that the existing process did not provide enough certainty to uh, facilitate private investment in solar on city-owned land. This enables the type of definiteness that you need in order to enter long-term leases with private companies in order to facilitate solar on city-owned land. Other city map changes, we heard a ton about how state of good repair work happens on roads all the time, periodically. Uh, when DOT would want to raise the grade of a street to promote resiliency, that takes a city map change. You can't just do it in the process of state of good repair work. And so that would go undone, leaving neighborhoods exposed to flood risk. Under this recently enacted proposal, you can raise street grade up to the base flood elevation plus 2.5 feet through ELRP, and can also do an attendant street widening to that street grade change in order to promote more resilient infrastructure in those neighborhoods. Um, and then any changes that come along with some of the acquisitions that I mentioned above, sometimes those entail city map changes as well, and they could ride along on that ELRP. Similar with site selections, these are for capital projects on city-owned property for resiliency, open space, and solar power, as long as structures are 5,000 square feet or less. The commission really wanted to expedite these resiliency projects, but recognize sometimes you have big projects like East Side Coastal Resiliency or something like that that absolutely should go through full ULURP, and so those will remain subject to full ULURP. Next slide, please. All right, Affordable Housing Appeals Board. Heard a lot that ULURP often did not effectively balance neighborhood perspectives with citywide needs, in particular because of the evolution emerging from the structure of 1989 ULURP that led council often at the end of ULURP to defer to the desires of the affected council member, one council member out of a body of 51, in a way that turned ULURP into something with a more local perspective than was envisioned when it was put into place. The commission, in order to address this, made some applications subject to this Affordable Housing Appeals Board that consists of three democratically elected officials, namely the mayor, the city council speaker, and the affected borough president. Next slide, please. So, what types of applications would be subject to this? Again, AHAB was intended to strike a better balance. ULURPs and text amendments. So, say a zoning map change plus an MIH text amendment, could be a special permit as well, must directly facilitate at least MIH levels of affordability. That's what makes it an affordable housing appeals board rather than an appeals board for just any old project. Must be within a single borough. So you can't have a big citywide text amendment. The dynamics around citywide actions are very different anyway because it affects all council members, and so council members typically negotiate those amongst themselves as a body. And applications of that sort, ULURP text amendment, least MIH levels of affordability within a single borough, can be, if modified by the council or if disapproved by the council, can be appealed to the appeals board, either by the applicant or by 2 out of 3 members of the appeals board. And if 2 out of 3 members agree, that is a majority, appeals board can override a city council disapproval, or it can undo individual council modifications. But ULURP is otherwise completely the same, just with this appeals board at the end of the process rather than the existing mayoral veto. ELRP and the fast track proposals, basically everything I described up to this point, not eligible for Affordable Housing Appeals Board. This is a complementary initiative in order to try to address, some of those housing production or equity around housing production issues that the commission was focused on. Next slide, please. So here's the pre-existing ULURP with how it would work under the Affordable Housing Appeals Board. As you can see, they look very much the same all the way through City Council. And instead of mayoral veto and potential City Council override, as in the past, now there will be Affordable Housing Appeals Board. The appeals board applicant or the appeals board has 5 days to appeal, and then the appeals board has 15 days to consider and pass judgment. So this adds this extra stage at the end of the process that subtly influences some of the incentives among the actors within ULURP in a way that the commission hopes will have beneficial outcomes in terms of where in the city can see changes to land use and can see affordable housing production. Okay, next. Modernize and digitize the city map. So the commission heard testimony from many folks during the process about our fractured city map system. The city consolidated 125 plus years ago, but the city map never did. Pre-1938 maps were, canvas maps or paper maps that were stored in the various borough halls around the city. And just the inefficiency and anachronism of that process adds significant time and money to any application that needed to either confirm jurisdiction on the city map or that needed to do changes to the city map in order to achieve their projects. And so the commission proposed and the voters, overwhelmingly, like mid 70% approval of this one, voted to consolidate the city map, modernize it, ultimately to digitize it so that if you need confirmation of jurisdiction under the city map, you can do it from, the comfort of your own home rather than having to schlep to, Kew Gardens or whatever during the designated hours in order to look at canvas maps, dating back to the 1800s or sometimes even before, in order to try to figure out what's happening on a particular parcel of land. This was especially affected waterfront areas with shifting shorelines and, disputed ownership over the years. So what's the timeline for this? By January 1st, 2027, I guess that's less than a year away, address assignment will be consolidated at city planning. Address assignment is really important. Consistency is really important because, for instance, our emergency responders use this when you call 911 to figure out, where they have to go in order to address that medical emergency or what have you. And so this was seen by the commission and by the voters as a good thing to have centralized in a consistent way as well. City maps, acquiring those, scanning those, digitizing those. That will happen by January 1st, 2028, in conjunction with the borough, the BP, the borough president topographical offices. And then the schedule has those being completely digitized by January 1st, 2029. Then those will go through a formal public review process in order to render them formally, legally, the city map that fully enables that future that I was describing, where you can confirm jurisdiction for your project from the comfort of your own home rather than having to mess around with paper maps or consult multiple layers going back hundreds of years. Okay, next slide, please. So we're in the midst of implementation right now. Basically, all of the actions that I reviewed are in effect right now. Suppose with the exception of affordable housing fast track, which will be assessed the bottom 12 towards the end of the year, with fast track opening January 1st, 2027. But various rulemaking processes are underway for those that will help clarify applicability, clarify process, just to provide maximal transparency to applicants, to members of the public, to participants in these new land use review procedures. So the BSA fast track rule that's being led by BSA and HPD, that has been published and is headed towards a public hearing around the rulemaking in early April. We at City Planning are spearheading the rulemaking around affordable housing fast track. That is the specific methodology for calculating the bottom 12 community districts. That rule has also been published and is heading towards a hearing on April 1st. There is a public info session next week, next Wednesday, I believe, on the 25th, for folks who are interested in participating in that process. Just trying to ensure that that calculation is 100% transparent, that it relies on publicly available sources of data, so that everybody is clear on that as we move towards implementing the fast track in earnest in early 2027. Similarly, ELERP, we've got a rule in process around applicability and process that has not yet been published, but keep an eye out. Same with AHAB, process and eligibility, a rule that will enter the public review process in the next couple months. There are a few projects that are already underway for ELERP, a resiliency project, an affordable housing project, and a rezoning that just certified today, actually. And we are continuing to talk to community boards, elected officials, and others who have questions about this, and are heading towards another practitioner info session in the coming weeks. Believe that's it for the presentation, and so we are open for any questions that you may have right now.
Thank you, John. That was very helpful and informative. We've got some questions starting to build in the Q&A function. So please use that to continue to ask questions if you prefer to do that in writing. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a symbol for raised hand. If anybody would like to verbally speak until ask their question to John, please hit that button. Otherwise, please continue to use the Q&A and we will run through, I'll read the questions out and John will answer them from there. So the first question I actually am going to pull from the Q&A. We do have a few hands that are raised, but there was multiple people who were asking, and I can take this, John. Will this presentation be provided? So can it be shared to others in the community board? I will be dropping into the chat the YouTube video for this, so you'll have access to it through the YouTube, and we will be sending to the community boards an email with the YouTube and presentation. The next question, John, is are all community board districts going to have fast track? Maybe you can explain a little bit more about the community board's process within the fast track.
Okay, so I outlined two separate fast tracks for affordable housing. One is the BSA action that is available citywide for publicly financed affordable housing projects, and community boards have 60-day review for every single one of those. That's available citywide. Next is the affordable housing fast track for community districts that produce the least affordable housing. That is available on 5-year cycles in the 12 community districts that produced the least affordable housing over the last 5 years. And for those, while it's an expedited process, community boards retain 60-day review concurrently with borough presidents for any actions that use that affordable housing fast track.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from the chat, and then we can move over to raised hands. Is the BSA fast tracked for existing HDFC developments or for developers who create new project-specific HDFC affiliate to undertake a project? What is required for a newly created development affiliated HDFC?
That's a great question. So HDFCs, I should have clarified during the initial presentation, that's just the state laid out in state law that serves as the vehicle for virtually every new affordable housing project that the city sponsors. It's rentals, it can be home ownership affordable, whatever, but you have to be an HDFC. So typically anytime an affordable housing developer wants to do a project using city or state for that matter, or even federal subsidy, in New York State, they create an HDFC in order to do that. And so the BSA fast track, I think, that is envisioned for the types of projects where you have developers who have, control over a given site and want to develop with HPD typically, but sometimes with HCR or sometimes even with HUD, want to develop affordable housing there. It was seen as a vehicle to get those projects done when they don't strictly comply with the zoning, but when they meet all those other criteria that I laid out. HDFC in an area that already allows residential can meet a neighborhood character finding and are consistent with the design and development standards at HPD. So it's just an alternate path instead of coming through a rezoning and all the complications that entails, getting project specific approvals from BSA that enable that project to get done faster and cheaper and bring that affordable housing online sooner.
Okay, I'll do one more from the written comments. Um, when will they be realist? When will it be realistic about? When will we be realistic about how affordable housing, what we call affordable housing building opened, goes to apply. Sorry, this is just a little jumbled. Let me come back to this one. We can come back to that one. Why don't we answer? Thank you for the information, John. How would you go about submitting a private application for a building up to 45 feet for ELERP? Is guidance available on the website, or how's this process not been released yet?
Yes, we're trying to, provide as much guidance as necessary for applicants who want to use the new land use actions. Like I said, for ELERPs and lower density areas, if you're in a lower density district that is R1 through R5 that allows residential today, you are now able to rezone to any other low density district, say from an R3 to an R5D or something like that through ELERP. And for folks in CBs, you may not necessarily think of districts in terms of the height it allows or the FAR it allows. You can think about them in terms of the district names. So R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, but you can go anywhere within that family through ELERP under the current proposals. If you have any questions about a potential rezoning, the borough offices at city planning are here, or we are here in the central offices to answer any questions that you have around potential projects.
Thanks, John. I'm going to turn to raised hands, and I want to say from the start, I'm sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name. Please correct me when you come online. Can we have Valerie Mason unmuted?
Promoting the panelist.
Thank you.
Valerie, you should be able to turn on your microphone and camera if you wish.
Hi. Hi, Valerie.
Hey, Valerie.
Hey, John, how are you?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for your presentation tonight. That it was really excellent. A couple of questions. We've been trying to determine whether our district is actually going to fall within the, top or bottom 12, whichever way you want to look at it. And some of the things we're struggling with is this definition of unit. And I mean, as crazy as it sounds, we have construction going on all over our district, but they are all rather large units. And I just wonder, is it possible to get credit for a unit, a studio, which is theoretically going to house maximum 1 or 2 people, but a larger unit, which may house at least 4? We seem to will suffer. I don't want to say suffer, but the calculation may not be as reasonable for us. So I was wondering if there's going to be any adjustment with respect to how large the units are.
Gotcha. I would encourage you, Valerie, to take a look at the published rule around the methodology and to participate in the rulemaking process. Like I said, there is a info session on March 25th.
Okay.
And then there's a public hearing on April 1st that gets right to the heart of the issue that you're bringing up here. Very briefly, I could say that the proposed rule in the numerator, it just has new affordable housing units created in your community district over the last 5 years that have hit two milestones. One is they have to have building permits, and two, they have to have hit their start date, which for publicly financed development means that they've entered into a regulatory agreement with HPD typically.
Mhm.
For privately financed, it means that they have issued their intent to market their affordable units. So these are affordable units that are pretty far along in the process and almost certain to be actually delivered.
Okay.
When it comes to the denominator, how many units are in the denominator? It's just all existing units. We do not, propose to adjust for size or anything like that in the community district at the beginning of the cycle, and that comes from census data on number of housing units, plus any incremental changes that the city planning lays out in its semi-annual housing database. So if you have further questions about particulars after looking at the published rule, I'm very happy to work with you to answer those between now and the calculation in October.
Okay, great.
But okay.
Just a related question on number two, which is the, I guess, fast tracking. I guess first you have to be in the bottom 12.
Mm-hmm.
But we submitted a plan that would switch our manufacturing zoned area to residential for the very purpose of trying to get some affordable housing in our neighborhood. Is that going to be, would that process be available for us to be an applicant to have that rezoning on a quick basis?
Yes. If a community district is in the bottom 12, uh, a private landowner can apply. A community board consistent with the charter requirements around applying can apply as well. A public entity, like city planning can apply as well. Any lawful applicant can take advantage of that fast track process for a qualifying project. That is one that's guaranteed to provide affordable housing.
And are there any going to be, as you well know, community boards do not have a huge budget. Is there going to be some resource available to us at city planning to help us put an application together if we wanted to do that? I mean, what kind of resources is the city going to make available for that purpose, if any?
I'm unaware of any dedicated resources right now, but you have a great relationship with Manhattan office and others at city planning, and would encourage you to have those discussions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Valerie and John. Let's go to the next raised hand, Alexa Landsman.
I'll promote panelist. It looks like she took her hand down.
I see it raised on mine.
Oh, I see it again. Hold on one moment.
Hello.
Alexia, oh, there you go.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I have two quick questions. The first is just so if you are in an R5 zoning district and you're actually looking to rezone to a medium density, such as an R6 district, do you still qualify for ELRP if you're under that 30% threshold?
Great question. And the commission considered this, but ultimately, if you're in a low density district and you want to make that leap to a medium or high density district, they did not propose and the voters did not enact anything to make that happen in an expedited fashion. So if you want to go from an R5D to an R7A or something like that, that would still require ULURP just as it did, last year.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question I had was with regards to the 12 community districts. So if you are in that 12, does that mean that until the next list is generated 5 years later, any applications that, are brought forward with MIH in that district undergo this ELRP option?
That's right.
Okay.
Once if a community district is in the bottom 12, they remain in the bottom 12 for that full 5-year cycle. until the next set of 12 is calculated.
Okay, thank you very much. Those were my two questions.
Thank you. John, I'm going to jump back into the list of questions in the Q&A function.
Mhm.
Will the borough president's office still be responsible for maintaining, updating maps to then feed to DCP, or will all of that fall on DCP? Will the public get to review and comment on the maps before it's fully digitized and finalized?
So yes, the first part of the question, that function, not only the administration, but administration of map changes is going to be centralized at city planning. Any changes to the city map will continue to require a public process. I would say most will still require full ULURP. The categories I mentioned can happen, street grade raisings or, demappings for affordable housing. Those can happen through ELURP, but any change to the city map will still require a public process. And before the map is digitized and fully formally made legal, that map will have to go through a big citywide public review process, um, uh, basically ULURP, in order to formalize that. And so there will be a significant public review process at that time.
Great. The next question is the BSA applicable only for HBD sites? What about NYCHA owned sites?
So the BSA action is available for private sites, for public sites, whatever. Public ownership is not a criterion there. You just need to be an HDFC, uh, and you need to be able to meet a neighborhood character finding. You need to be within an area that already allows residential today, and you need that soft commitment letter from HPD or other subsidizing government entity. It could happen on public sites. It could happen on private sites. It works for both.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. For ELURP, for disposition of sale properties, will this only be properties officially designated as eligible by DCAS, or will they be an opportunity to petition to have a lot qualified?
So this category already exists in city law. These slivers, access ways, and interior lots that are determined by the mayor's office not to be independently developable. And so this charter revision proposal was really just piggybacking off an existing category. I'm not aware if there is any wiggle room in those determinations or an ability for private landowners to petition. I'd have to talk to folks at DCAS to see if there's wiggle room around that. But like I said, this proposal was piggybacking off a category of sites that has been operative for decades now.
Is there a list of approved building organizations or a place to look for examples of their work? I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if you can read into that, John. I'm not sure if there was a specific.
I'm not sure I can. I would
Yeah.
encourage the asker to come off mute and ask the question.
Frank, if you want to raise your hand, I think you asked this question in the chat. That would be really helpful to us. If a property owner has land in the amusement area in Coney Island, can they use ELURP to build housing?
So I take the question to be asking, can we take a parcel that does not allow residential today and use ELURP in order to enable residential? And ELURP is not available for that. The fast track, if you're in a bottom 12 community district, then you can, take even rezoning from a site that prohibits residential today to a residential district that would permit residential. But in terms of regular old ELURP map changes, You need to start with a site that already allows residential. Typically, if you're going from a site that doesn't allow residential today to one that will in the future, it typically makes sense to give that a little additional environmental and public review.
I don't see any raised hands, so I'm going to keep going to the questions in the chat. John, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between ELRP and MIH? Will ELRP lead to a more upzonings that don't trigger MIH and just result in a modest increase in market rate units?
So the Charter Revision Commission and its staff took a look at the universe of possible ELRP rezonings. And under existing MIH policy, virtually every ELRP rezoning in a medium and high density district is above that threshold that triggers MIH. There are very few exceptions. For instance, if you're going from an R7D, which tops out at 5.6 FAR today, to an R7X that tops out at a 6, that's a less than 10% increase in density, which under existing policy is not above that MIH threshold. But when you're talking about increases that are that, minuscule in the first place, probably unlikely that anybody would apply for those, go through the hassle even of going through an ELRP rezoning there. And so, as laid out in the final report, there's a whole section on this with a little chart. I would say virtually every ELRP rezoning in medium and high density districts will result in application of MIH.
My gosh, I'm sorry. I keep not unmuting myself. Are there any changes contemplated to expedite the pre-application process for ELRP or ULRP in general?
So those are not charter issues, and so the Charter Revision Commission did not consider them. However, under the Mamdani administration, there's the speed task force that was announced, I believe, on day one. Part of which involves taking a hard look at pre-certifications at agencies like DCP to see whether all that time, all that money is strictly necessary in order to get projects to public review, in order to get the approvals that lead to more housing and more affordable housing that is pretty desperately needed in the city. So yes, folks are looking at it. It was not the Charter Revision Commission.
Thank you. Just want to give a heads up. We're close to the hour being up. We only have a couple more questions in the queue, so I'm actually going to go ahead and ask those questions to John, and then we'll end up closing up. So John, the next question is, when the community board receives an application, will it be flagged in ZAP, which is the zoning application portal, if it qualifies for one of these new programs?
Yes, absolutely. Our land use process team at City Planning has been, in my opinion, working pretty heroically to update our systems in order to make sure that applicants, members of the public, participants in ELRP, ULRP, other land use actions have full awareness of the type of project they're dealing with, relevant timelines, and so forth. So that's all on ZAP, will be on ZAP, and of course, we're here to answer any questions as we get these things up and running.
Thank you. For lower density ELRPs, R1 to R5, is there a minimum lot size or minimum size of a tract of land that can apply?
There is no strict threshold laid out in the charter or anywhere else, but just as any rezoning, ULRP, ELRP, whatever, the land use action has to be consistent under state law with a well-considered plan. And so there are no shortcuts to ensuring that a given action, whether ELIRP or ULIRP, is supported by sufficient land use rationale, is in accordance with that well-considered plan. And, the commission, as they do today, will continue to lay out the case for approval or disapproval, as the case may sometimes be, in a CPC report that serves as, one of the most important parts of the decision record around that. So even if the process is a little bit shorter, those legal requirements around land use appropriateness remain absolutely the same. And if it's a site that is too small to go through ULIRP today, that you would need a broader rezoning area, then under ELIRP, it's a site that's too small to go through that and will need a broader rezoning area. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. When the digital map is online, will the digitized map have legal authority in any way?
So I mentioned earlier that once all the maps are scanned, once they're all digitized, there will be a final and very significant step, which is to take that through ULIRP, through citywide public review, in order to formalize that as the legal city map. And so, yes, it does have to go through that public review process in order to be absolutely the final formal word on city map issues, authority, jurisdiction, things like that.
Great. And so the last question we have of the evening, there might be some extra others in the chat that we'll certainly get to you by email. But the next question is just how can we get more, how can we get the questions that people have? And that I would like to say, like, I'll put into the chat as well. There is a email that you can send your questions to. It is charterdl@planning.nyc.gov, and that is in the chat for everybody there. I'd like to remind everyone to also go to our website, to the Department of City Planning's calendar, so you can see the upcoming CAPA rulemaking meeting on March 25th. And then for the City Planning Commission public hearing that will be held April 1st. Those are both on our website. You can join via Zoom, by phone, and of course, we'd love to have you in person. And John, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add. Otherwise, we want to thank you all for coming tonight.
No, just that the email that Lara put in the chat, it's not a black hole. It basically just goes to the people who are presenting to you today, and we look forward to your questions, and we'll answer them as expeditiously as